Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome. I'm Rob Doherty, and this is the FSTVS Podcast Executive Edition, supported by Liberry Consulting and hosted by Julian Scott, the animation consultant for Film London. In this podcast series, we'll be chatting to the movers and the shakers in the animation industry, and discovering a little bit more about what they do, how they got there, their thoughts on the animation industry, and I hope get to meet the person behind that executive title. Before I introduce this week's guest, a little bit of housekeeping. Did you know that FSTVS is more than just this podcast? It's also a hub to find other amazing industry podcasts, though none as amazing as this one, obviously. Did you know that we post animation, VFX and gaming jobs? That we have a dedicated industry news page? We showcase training courses and other essential industry resources. And of course, the backbone of it all, our fantastic in-person networking and social events throughout the year. And all of this is free to our members. Find out more at FSTVS.net. That's FSTVS.net. And now to our guest, the esteemed Terry Kalagian. These days, Terry sits atop her throne as President of Global Animation for Kids and Family at Gaumont in Paris. But her career path is a veritable who's who of stellar company names. Cartoon Network, Rainmaker, Marvel, Mattel, Atomic Cartoons. So let's join Julian as he talks in more depth about Terry's career and prepare to be inspired and motivated by her rules to live by. Especially my favourite, rule number 4, don't slap each other.
Terry, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, nice to see you, Julian.
Very, very good to see you too. And now, we've known each other for more years than we probably care to recall. And in that time, you have risen via Cartoon Network, Rainmaker, Gaumont, and a raft of private clients, which included Mattel, Marvel, and Atomic Cartoons, to the dizzy heights of President of Global Animation, Kids and Family at Gaumont now, and you're living it up in Paris. On that journey, you've been equally at home in the creative side as well as the business development. But let's go back to the start. Where did it all begin for you? Do you recall being drawn, no pun intended, to animation when you were young? Were there any particular films or TV shows that you were drawn to and maybe influenced your future?
Well, I've always loved cartoons, I have to say, always. Part of it, I think, had to do with the fact that I'm Japanese American, and so in kind of on the live action side, you didn't really see any, Japanese American kids or Asian kids or kids that looked like me or kind of were in my world in a way. So there was that. And then there was also, I always loved animation, even when I remember in the U.S. that on Sunday nights there used to be the Walt Disney show. And I used to hate the live action and always loved the animated movies, so always drawn there and loving animation. So, and I remember like the very first cartoon I think that I ever did see though, and it was in reruns, but still loved it. Speed Racer. I loved Speed Racer back in the day. And I think it was all uphill or downhill, depending on what your point of view is from there.
No, I think one of the first ones for me was Wacky Races, actually.
Yeah, love it.
Excellent show. Now, did you ever try animating yourself before you got into the business? Because one of the things I've discovered as these podcasts have gone on is one or two quite senior executives have actually dabbled themselves when they were younger.
Never animation per se. My brother was the one who was more of the artist in the family. I was more of the writer. So I was writing poems and writing stories ever since I was a kid. And in fact, thought that I would be a writer when I grew up, at some point. And so there are moments and times where I have been a writer, but I kind of went to it, circuitously. It wasn't a straight shot for me by any means at all.
But did you, you said you wrote poems and stuff like that. Was that something you then took forward to college? Was college the creative sort of aspect of what you studied?
No, not really. And the reason was I grew up in an Air Force family, and so we didn't have a lot of money, and so when I went to college, it was a lot about, okay, so what could I make a living doing? And my first, I did a little bit of research into, can I make a living being a copywriter? No, the answer is no. I mean, of course you can, or some people can, but I went into it when I first started uni. It was more from a business standpoint, weirdly. So yeah, business and marketing was where I started with university, and my MBA is an emphasis in marketing as well. And then it was just when when I started at Cartoon Network that towards the backside of my tenure there, that I got on the creative side. Up until that point, I actually was more on the business side, weirdly.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people think, when they think of animation specifically, they think of it as, a very creative industry, which of course it is.
Yeah.
But there's also a big business side to that. You need to, if you're going to run a studio, you need a business strategy, you need a plan. So coming into it from a business perspective, it's not really a bad thing, is it?
Well, I hope not. I think that's part of the reason why I've been able to, to go through the doors that I've been able to go through. Because for me, I've been super lucky. The first outside of uni, when I first got out, I kind of was drawn into the research side of things. So I stayed in research for years and years, and actually loved it because I love finding out new things every day. And so for me, that was an opportunity to find out new things. And it wasn't when I first started my career, it wasn't in television necessarily. It was doing research for many different things, and as just a general market research position. And then, so I worked at one of those research companies in the States that did like Coca-Cola versus Pepsi taste tests, everything from that to like also doing surveys about, soy sauce, and also, helping with Nielsen boxes. Again, all of this was US based. And then eventually found my way into doing research for television networks. And so that's how I kind of got into getting into Cartoon Network. And so I had worked at local TV stations in the U.S., a few different ones, and wasn't really quite liking it for a lot of reasons. I tended to be on the news side, weirdly, and news is a bit, it can get you down a bit, in case you haven't noticed, more recently than before. But, and so then I actually had applied at Turner in Atlanta, and applied for the first job, funny enough, that I ever applied for there was at CNN, and, news, because that's where my experience was. And I didn't get that job. But they were so nice about it. And so they're like, you have a great background or whatever in research. So, but we'll call you the next time we have an opening. Great. And then I got called for one of the entertainment networks, and didn't get that job. And, but they were again so nice, and it was for a more senior position. So they're like, still love to keep in contact with you. And I said, great. And then, we kept in contact. And at one point I said, well, what about any of your other networks? And they said, well, there is a position open at Cartoon, thinking that I would never want to go for that because I had been kind of in this news and grown up space. And I said, Cartoon? Well, I think that's a yes. And so I interviewed there, and then got offered the job, and then off to the races.
So your first job in animation was in research. So with all those skills that you'd honed over those years, and your college degree and everything else, you arrived at Cartoon Network in research. What was research like at Cartoon Network?
So I headed up the research department for Cartoon and Cartoon US, not for the other, because each of the other territories have their own infrastructure. And it was lots of fun. I joined it back in the early days before hardly anyone paid attention. I joined it before we had Adult Swim, before we had even Toonami, and we had Dragon Ball at that point, and we had Cowboy Bebop, but we hadn't put them in their own kind of their own franchise. And And my team did everything from going out and doing focus groups with kids and parents around the United States. And I had the privilege of seeing literally thousands of kids talk about what they love, what they hate, what they do in their spare time, what they watch on television, where they want to go on vacation, whether or not a Barbie doll should be turned into, a truck, or whether a truck should be turned into a baby doll. It was wonderful and fantastic. And then we did the other side of the research too, which is what we call quantitative, where we did all the analysis for all the Nielsen ratings, which is not as fun if you're leaning into creative side, but great training, I'd say. So when I look at creative now, if I'm looking at it just for myself because of something I enjoy, that's one thing, and certainly I do that. But if I'm looking at creative from the point of view of trying to sell it at some point, then I bring all of that knowledge to the table. Which is, I think, key. And I also speak the language of the buyers in some ways, right? So that when they're saying things, it's for me, it's melding all that information into what they're actually also saying, that they need for their either platform or for their error.
And a lot of the platforms over these, subtle or maybe less subtle differences between Cartoon and Nickelodeon and Disney and PBS in America or the BBC here in the UK. Those having an understanding of that audience, and as you just said, being able to sort of speak to the buyers in their language. Do you think that's a really important skill to hone or talent to get?
Well, I think it doesn't hurt, to be honest. Things are always changing on the inside of companies, and we never know, right? What are the discussions and what are the pain points that they have and that sort of thing. And I think that a lot of people forget that. I remember when I left Cartoon and became an independent writer producer, a lot of people, I don't know. It was the response that they gave me was interesting because they're like, well, how do you like being on the outside? Ha ha, kind of thing. And I said, well, I have to tell you, there's different pressures, on inside and outside. There's different pressures when you're at a buy, whether you're at a TV network or if you're at a platform. You get your report card, at least at Cartoon in the US, we would get our ratings every day by quarter hour. So by every 15 minutes by demo breakdown. I had a report card every single day of of how well I was doing. And if I wasn't doing well, because, I was responsible, my team was responsible for programming and acquiring and all that kind of stuff. There's a pressure internally. It's like, why aren't we doing better? How come our competitors are doing better? How are we promoting? Why aren't we promoting this correctly? What kind of research can you give us? And then later on, when I moved over into the programming side, why aren't we getting the right programs that are, getting the audience that we need? The pressure is different. It's completely different on the inside. So I think that if you are able to learn any of that or get your hands on any of that, and just do some digging, I think it's definitely puts you in a better place.
No, I 100%. And it's always a bit of a dark art, isn't it? Sort of the ratings and understanding what's happening. The breakdown that you just gave is really scary.
Yeah.
By every 15 minutes by sort of demographic and gender and genre and everything else.
Totally.
But as a creative, as a producer, as a programmer, did you feel that was almost sort of like, I don't know, leveling stuff out? So there was no light and shade. There was no sort of there was an attempt to make there be no variation in what your schedule looked like, because they were saying everything needed to be the same.
No, in between the lines and the numbers is the art, right? So, and the reality is that research won't tell you and won't predict a hit. I think there's been a lot of research that tells you that, and all the stories about Seinfeld and all the stories about Friends, blah, blah, blah. We've all heard them. At the same time, research can tell you where you're going wrong, So I remember years and years ago, we had research some animation that we were testing, and we had some what seemed to be super funny accents in the animation, but the kids didn't understand it. So the kids didn't understand the joke. They didn't understand what was being said. They didn't understand the joke. I mean, to the point where, what should have been funny as a basic level wasn't, and so that seems like it's a no-brainer, but when you're grown up, it feels like the music of something should be funny enough, or maybe you make these assumptions, and that's the whole point of the research. And so that really, I think, taught us quite a bit. How kids interact with content, really is enlightening in a lot of ways. So yeah, it in between the numbers, is the story, and I don't mean like a fake story. I'm not suggesting that you make it up. I think it's good for all of us to know the truth of things, and if your gut tells you to do something else, that's okay. It's entertainment, and I think someone famous once said, we don't know nothing, right, about entertainment, but in between there, and I think that. The art and where you hit the funny is, that's the thing that as an individual, and if you're a good creative, a lot of times you're able to bring that to the table, and not that I'm saying that there are bad creatives necessarily, I think that sometimes ideas hit and sometimes they don't. And it's not even about how great an idea is that translates into success, because I think there's a whole lot of other things that go into that formula of success, and great content is like actually only a small part of it. There's timing, there's promotion, there's right opportunity, there's right partnerships, blah, 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 blah. I think that there's so many other things that go into whether or not something's successful.
Agreed. And you've actually given me a really neat segue into my next question, which was you talking about relationships, because you moved from programming into acquisitions and co-productions. And again, based in the US, working for Cartoon, a US-based network, playing to a US audience. What sort of things were you looking for from presumably outside the US in terms of content? What were the shows and the partners that you thought that can work here as well as there?
Yeah. So I have to say that a lot of that thought process did come from the research side, right? It's like, what were making kids happy, and what were they loving? And, and other than knowing, okay, and this was way back when, right? So other than knowing that kids were loving, Disney movies and, Rugrats and SpongeBob, like, okay, great. But I'm not going to make a Rugrats wannabe necessarily, or SpongeBob wannabe. I mean, those were genius shows. So, what can we do? And as you said, we had a studio. So they were the ones that were talking to all of the internal creatives, internal inside the US. And my job, because we had 24 hours to fill, we had a library of Hanna-Barbera, library of Looney Tunes, and some Jay Ward and some Tom and Jerry. But like, what are the new kind of things? And so it was really looking at the demographics that we needed. So an example is that, and I think I got them at the same time, but we were down with girls, and in order for us to win or get our ratings up, being American, you always talk about like winning, so I was looking for something that I knew would do well with girls, but that wouldn't make boys run away. That was the thing, is like, you had to be super careful, and we were trying to get closer to a 50-50 percentage split. So, and so it showed that I had passed on a couple of times just because it had been up, was Totally Spies. Right. And when we were focused on, okay, you know what, we really do need to push girls, and we need to do this, I was convinced that Totally Spies was the one. And I had also bought at the time Atomic Betty out of Canada, which was a fun show. And we packaged those two together to be totally atomic, And it took a bit of convincing internally. And that's the other pressure that people don't realize is that just because you have someone, an exec who is acquisitions acquisitions, co-productions or whatever, you still have to do a sales job inside. Like no one gets to have unless you own the network, that you get to have like pure green light, power. So I had to sell it inside. And at the time, our general manager took home one of the videos for Totally Spies, and his daughters wouldn't turn it off all weekend. So he came back on Monday. He's like, "You're right. Let's do it." And that turned into, really a great steadfast program for us, and like got our ratings up, and our girl ratings grew by hundreds of percentage points, and our boy ratings even grew up by double digits. So that was one. Not everything is as successful clearly as that, but that one was, and I just believed in it immensely. In similar ways, I bought Code Lyoko, also for France. Totally was Spies was from France. Atomic Betty was from Canada. Code Lyoko was also from France, and really believed in it. It was, interesting, different kind of show. School kids, middle school kids who were who are having kind of a soapy life, but then go into a machine and turn into CGI and that whole thing. I really, really felt like that would, I don't know. It struck me as being really fun and exciting. And that one worked for us. We got 2 seasons of it, 52 episodes, and then we commissioned 45 more.
Wow. That's quite an order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has there ever been, maybe you don't want to answer this question. Has there ever been a project that you've passed on that, God forbid, became a huge success somewhere else? And I'll caveat that in that if you remember this show, I passed on Lazy Town a long time ago.
Oh, I remember the show. Wow.
When I was at Sesame Workshop, I passed on it, and it went on to...
I can understand that.
It became a massive success. But
Yeah. Massive success. I don't think so. I don't know that I was, the problem is because in the US, because I was acquisitions, co-productions, we didn't have a budget that was set that I could then cover a certain percentage of someone's budget. So most of the times people came to me with shows that already had a track record.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I came in a little bit on the later side. So it would have been like pre-buy or acquisitions. And if it was a pre-buy or something, they already had a bit of traction and already had, kind of, a foothold into the marketplace.
Understood. No, well,
I mean, I would tell you if I could remember, but like I said, I was always like the second round, and it would have proven itself to be, in whatever territory, whether it worked or not, I have to say, I'm so sad about this because, so we had a cartoon, for a split second, we had a preschool block called, Tickle University or Tickle You. And we loved this block. It was so fun. And we were partnered with our sister company, Warner Brothers at the time, to bring in content and to bring in titles. So we brought in like Crypto, Superman's dog. I negotiated with, Universal to do Land Before Time series, based on the movies. And I also picked up this little show called Pippa the Pig. And because I loved it so much. There was other ones too that came out of the UK, but I bought it from Contender back in the day from fabulous Joni Lofts, and then our block didn't last for very long because the ratings went down for 6 to 11. So it's more of a numbers thing, and we just couldn't. We just didn't have the appetite to try to, see if it would come back. And so poor Peppa kind of, I gave it back to Contender and said, we still want to be able to have the ability to have it, but you can get it back and sell it to someone else as well, blah, blah, blah. And it didn't get picked up again for like almost 10 years on Nick Jr.
Wow. And look at it now. It's huge.
Oh, I know. This is the thing. And I felt like it was always going to be a hit. It was always going to be a hit. But and it's talk about a show that kept on going. It's like fantastic. I still love that. I love this show.
Yeah, and Carrot in the UK is still producing new episodes. It's
amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. And they do a great job. I mean,
they really do.
Yeah, for sure.
And wearing my Film London hat, I just have to say they're based in London, so it's all good.
For sure. They do a good job, Jamie over there.
Yep. So, you were cartoon for a little while and you went through, research, programming, acquisitions and co-productions. Was those moves strategic? Did you have a sort of a game plan, or was it just, not just is the wrong word, but were they opportunities that came along and you thought, do you know, I've never done that before. That looks really interesting. Or was there a big picture, a journey you were planning?
I have to say I've never had a journey, a strategy or a plan that I could go by. I've tried over the years and say, oh, I should do a business plan for that. Or I should put for goodness sakes, my background's business. I should be able to do these businessy things. It's never worked. And so with that, the doors open, opportunities come up and I take them. So, and what that's done over the years is allowed me to do a lot of different things. And I'm grateful for that. Because I'm never afraid, if this gig wraps up for whatever reason, I'll go and do something else, and I think that it's super important to be curious about different parts of the business and different things that one could do, you need to be curious so that you can keep those juices flowing. And it's kind of like we're in the kids' business. And so we need to be childlike in that way. So I remember the first year that I went independent as an independent writer producer, and I was so lucky. Mattel was my first client, in line that had money. And there was a few others that, I'm grateful for. And then, and so my second year, I said, oh, I should put together a business plan. I should write down all the names of all the people who said they wanted to work with me and the projects or whatever. And I'll do the follow up, and I'll do this and this and this. Oh my gosh, not a single one of them came through, and it's not that people didn't want to. It's just different, circumstances change. And that's just the truth of it. Circumstances change, So, and so I was able to work on projects I never thought I would, but I never planned for. So, and then, well, you don't know, but my philosophy is that the universe will open doors for you and you can either go through them or not go through them. It doesn't care. But if you don't go through them, I found that life is harder. So, not that it's easy going through the door, but it's a whole lot harder if you don't. And so I go through the door.
No, my philosophy has always been, whenever my time comes, I don't want to be lying on my deathbed and thinking, I wonder what if.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
If I'd taken that job or, because as you said, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You can go and, try and do something else. But who knows what's through that door unless you step through it.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. And then, so this one time, because I'm also, like I said, writer producer. I've written on stuff, and I've written a book, and me and a friend of mine who's my co-writer on this, and we've sold it, and it's been under option, I think, ever since we actually finished the book. And it's a small book, and but it's been fun, and people like the idea, which is awesome. But at one point I'm like, you know what? I should try writing for ADR, writing for scripts that come through that need to be from anime. So they're translated from Japanese to English, and then they're rewritten for the actual actor, and the actor who's doing the ADR, it truly needs to act out, to what they're seeing on screen. And so they have to match what they're saying to the actual lip flap. But you need to write it also so that the thing they're saying is exciting and is what is happening in the scene, right? And I'm like, oh, I can do that. How hard can it be? Oh my gosh. Kudos to ADR writers. Let me just tell you, number one. And number two, I can't tell you. I was so bad at it. And I hated it. So I don't know which one, the chicken or the egg, but oh my God, I hated it so much. And I was bad at it. I mean, and I was lucky because I have friends who do this. So they let me do it and partnered me with a director And the director came back. He's like, you missed this, you missed this, you missed this breath, you missed this lip flap, you missed this. And I'm like, holy crap, And I probably spent 40, 50 hours on a couple of episodes of this anime series. And I was just like, okay, this clearly means a shut door. It's terrible.
Well, there's that phrase, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And maybe in this case,
exactly.
Nothing gained.
Exactly right. Exactly.
This podcast is made possible thanks to the support of the awesome Liberi Consulting. Liberi offers specially tailored industry-related training courses. Check them out at libericonsulting.com. That's LIBERI consulting.com. You can also find links to their fantastic courses on the Festivus website.
You've done a couple of other sort of off-piste things, I think, haven't you? Because wasn't there a moment when you went back not went back, but you went and taught in a school, taught science in a school, and you had a special name?
Yes. So during part of my time where I was independent, and again, remember that I had been in an environment where I was talking to kids and, like all the time, every day I was able to track what they were doing. And this is in the US, track what they were doing and just all of that and what changes they were going through and, what kind of media and what are the ratings and, and when you're independent, you don't really get access to that, unless you do something. So there's this after school program that was looking for teachers, instructors to be, and it was a science program. And so we would go to schools or YMCAs or churches or wherever, where these kids would go and teach science. Sciencey things. So it's like the fun experiments of science, making the volcano go or launching robots and making robots, launching rockets. And my name was Titanium Terry. And so, yeah. So I was Titanium Terry, had my little, sciencey apron, and I'd have my kit of science, my science lesson of the day. And during the summer, I taught like a space camp for kids that were half days for a week. That was quite fun. And so I got to get my hands back into the world of kids in a very real way. And tell you, they're a whole different species for sure. And they ranged in age. I had some preschool kind of classes that I taught that had to do with this is photosynthesis and this is, the sun and, these are things. And that was super fun. And then there were other ones that were a little bit, like I said, the space camp or, this is how you can tell different animals apart from their paw prints and all this kind of stuff. And then there was this one class. And I don't know why they did this. And again, it wasn't a class per se. I mean, parents were paying for their kids to go to these science things after school. But this one location put together like little kids who were 5 and 6 year olds with 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds. And they're completely different. So, we do the experiment of kinetic energy, and we'd have cars that are run by rubber bands. They were fun things. And this one little one got so mad at an 8-year-old that the little one slapped the 8-year-old in the face and just, and I had, we had rules, right? Your first rule is to listen and play. Second rule, have fun. Third rule, have fun. Fourth rule, don't slap anyone. I was like, okay, you guys, we have a fourth rule. Never, 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 never slap anyone. And it was just so, oh my gosh, the 8-year-old was like, ah! And then the little one started crying and there was crying all over the place and everybody, oh my gosh. I'm like, this is not science.
And it was that fourth rule something you've taken through in your professional career? So when you start a new job, you say, look, the fourth rule is don't slap each other.
Don't slap each other. Exactly. Yes. Variations of that rule have been applied to, have applied in the classroom of life. Yes.
Good stuff. Now, when you moved to Gaumont, that was a creative role, wasn't it? And you were covering animation and live action. And was that something that had been bubbling for a while? Your time as an independent producer and a consultant and a writer. Was that something that you saw as the next stage of what you wanted to do?
Again, that whole idea of strategy thing wasn't really that. It was more of, I had this opportunity. Nicholas Atlin, who had been a dear friend of mine and who I bought Code Lyoko from back in the day, had this position open. He was hired to be in charge to run the division, animation, kids and family. And he asked me, I was living in Vancouver at the time. I'm American, but I have lived up there twice on a couple of different projects. I was working for the North American office of this one company out of Europe. And he said, I have this position open, head of development. I'd love for you to come join me back in Los Angeles. And I had lived there before. So I said, okay, that sounds like fun. What are we going to do? And he's like, we can kind of do whatever we want. And I said, well, that's amazing. It sounds amazing and it is amazing, but it's kind of like when you have a clean slate like that, also there was pressure, right? Because we were moving at the time, we were moving that part of the company to the US. So we really felt a pressure to make sure that we were successful, and it was an opportunity to try to delve into live action space as well. I mean, for me, again, I love animation and I love the art of it for sure. But I think more than that, I love stories and I love storytelling. So for me, the medium has to match what the story is, so for every project that comes across my desk, if someone specifically like wants an animation or live action, I always ask that question, especially for animation. If it doesn't seem obvious that it should be animated, I ask that question, why do you feel like this should be animated versus being live action? Just because we all know animation takes longer. It can be more difficult to find a buyer in some ways, depending on what the story is. Also, depending what the marketplace is. Right now it's a little bit harder for live action, but it used to be harder for animation. So, it depends on the market, but I always ask that question. So this was an exciting opportunity to be able to get my hands dirty in the live action space. And then during COVID, the company expanded my role. Gaumont expanded my role. And by this point, I had already been there, 4 years maybe. And they expanded my role to include scripted drama. So yeah, in the middle of COVID, I was able to get my hands dirty, not just in kids programming, which I love so much. And I love the people in kids programming too. I love our community. Our community has their heart in the right place. We want to make sure that we have content that's good for kids, but also that kids love. When we love the audience and we love the content. I mean, it's a different thing. If you're in kids programming for the money, you're like in the wrong part of the business because we know how that is. And so, but being able to tell stories in the scripted drama space as well allowed me to expand, and work in those areas. And what I came to realize is the tenets of good storytelling comes down to the same place, which is know your audience. And so, there's some storytelling that is obviously too sophisticated for kids, and some storytelling that is not interesting to adults, that sort of thing. So, it's rare that you'd find something that would appeal to both. You do stumble upon it every once in a while. And I think we've seen that a little bit in like Bluey, for example. We find that adults and kids really love that. I have a show on Apple called Stillwater. And I have had so many parents come up to me and tell me how much they themselves, love the show, which I'm, forever grateful, to them for and to Apple to be able to make that show. So, but rarely, that's rare. Mostly it's like kids like to watch themselves on screen. Adults want to see themselves on screen. That's kind of the rule. So yeah, for me, it's about storytelling, and whether we do it in animation or we do it in live action or we do it in a hybrid, it's really finding the most compelling way to tell that story.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, you pretty much answered my next question, which was, does animation and live action and does sort of, adult programming, do they all sort of feed into each other, inform you? But when you talk about, ultimately it's all down to storytelling. And as you just said, knowing your audience, that's the key, isn't it?
I think so. I do think so. And it's, Or, we meet, I go to festivals and I talk to animation students quite a bit. And, I think it's also looking at yourself in the mirror. If you're creating something, who are you creating it for? And being honest about that. If you're creating it for yourself, which there's nothing wrong with that at all, but it's being honest, right? So it's like if you're creating, then don't expect that everybody will love it, because they won't. Everybody won't love it. Everybody does not love everything. It's just, I don't know if you've been pitched shows like this where you'll have someone tell you, oh, this is for everyone. Mm-hmm. Everybody's going to love this. No, they won't. No, they won't. No. But it's okay if you're writing it for you. That's totally, totally okay, But just know that, so that so that you can be true to yourself as you're putting that together. And so there's other things that I've started to write that are just for me, that I have fun writing, and they're more dramatic. They're more on the grown-up side. But I've written I've done development for my own stuff when I've been independent, and at the end of the day, I'm writing it for me. It's there's stories that, if you're a storyteller, I'm sure this is for you the case as well, being a producer and like a writer, the stories, they rattle around in your head. And until you can put them on paper in a computer, they kind of stick there. And so that for me has been a way to exercise some of those stories and get them out. So it makes room for other things. And
you're still writing now, even with this big job?
Well, not as much. I have to say, I spend a lot of time, because what we do is I spend a lot of time with development. So most of that creative gets channeled into doing that and trying to make those projects that we're going out selling. If I can, and not always, but if I can try to put, make it a little bit better here and there, then that's what I do. But it's, I don't get to write as much, I have to say. Every once in a while, I feel the urge, and I'm like, okay, everything's out. I'm just gonna type out some stuff right now.
No, good for you. Because I was going to say, I mean, you've been in this role, president, big title of Global Animation Kids and Family at Gaumont. You've been in Paris for, I think, just over a year now, and
just about
animation and live action. And global is a big territory. Yeah. So, what kind of ideas and relationships are working for you now? Where do the successful ideas come from?
I have to say that I think because it is global, the business is global. I mean, those of us who have been in animation for so long, we understand how that works, right? Because we've had to do it forever, because, only in the US has a show been able to be fully financed, say, the rest of us and the rest of the world. And I say us because I've been, and most of my business, ever since I've been in this part of the business, has been outward facing, outside the U.S. So, rarely are shows able to be, and, sorry to talk about it on the money side, but we want to have these ideas actually made. We do want to make them. We do want to make shows that kids get to see. So global is more about really relationships as opposed to creative. So it really is working together with, we have a partnership with Studio 100 out of Germany, and they look at our shows. We look at their shows. And it's not just them, but we love our partnership with them because I feel like we're in sync creatively, which is good. And so it really is about, okay, do we think that there's a show or an idea that will work for Germany or other parts of Europe, and also France and also UK? And, how do we come up with these ideas that resonate with kids, globally? For us, global starts in Europe and maybe the US, and then goes out from there. But at the same time, I've had a lot of experience working in the Japanese market, so I always keep in touch with Japanese producers who I love so much. I don't have as much experience, working in the Chinese market or the Pan-Asian market, but happy to. I talk to them all the time, folks from Malaysia. Or India, of course. We have relationships with Indian partners, with lots of different Indian partners, and a couple who are wonderful partners of ours that have helped us on our shows and who have worked on our shows and who are actually co-producing with us on a couple of our shows. So it's more of a global standpoint of what are some ideas that resonate across everywhere. And I would say there's no singular kind of idea, it's but it comes from more about us being partners as opposed to, okay, what are the creative ideas that work everywhere? Yes, that's it. But also, how do we work together to get it made?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And one of the things I still love about the animation business is that it is global. There's no doubt about it.
No.
But in some ways, it's still quite small. There's a lot of people that we've all known each other for a long time, and there's a shorthand, and it's international, but it's like in a way it's like a family, and it's those personal relationships that really make it work.
Totally, I completely believe that and agree 100%. It's just we all have this focus of trying to make content for kids, and it's kids around the world. And I believe that our content makes a difference. I see it. We feel it. And it's just like, we remember fondly of the shows. You started off, our session talking about shows that we grew up with, but it's still the same today. And you do talk to these kids who grew up with, whether it's Sesame Street or whether it's, whether it is Rugrats or whether it's, Wild Creatures or whether it, name them, what Barbapapa, Postman Pat, like those are ones from all over and out of Germany, even ours, that we have Belle and Sebastian that we did as an international co-production, around the world. And that's a brand that Gaumont owns and has owned, for 30 years. And people love it. Kids love it. They remember it. And it brings them a happiness. And so any day that you can make a kid laugh, that's a pretty good day.
It's a very good day. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And the audience are, I think they have shifted. Certainly the older sort of 6+ kids, mm-hmm. they've moved away from the traditional broadcast channels and platforms and even the streamers. And there's a subsequent downturn in commissioning and investment from those organisations. So, are you now looking at YouTube and social games like Roblox as an opportunity?
For sure, absolutely. Again, it's going where the audience is, right? And how do we provide content that touches them there? It's a bit tougher because, as you know, and I think everyone knows, it's not a secret at all that YouTube. We say YouTube, but really YouTube is a collection of billions of pieces of content, literally billions of pieces of content. So, and new stuff every day. And so that's lightning in a bottle. If you can, find something that resonates there. And I think Roblox is the same. And it is trying to find, what are the levers of the things that are exciting kids. So we absolutely are looking in those places and then trying to figure out, again, partnerships. How do we partner with people who are success in those places, but also where we can lend a hand on creative development. My team, we specialize in that and always have. And so it's bringing to the table the knowledge that we have of kids, but also what are some ways to break through those billions of pieces of content to bring a group of kids some fun some fun in a title, or how do we take a title that's just a kind of a video game and turn that into a narrative? And I truly, again, that's where that storytelling comes in. I believe that it's almost always possible to do that. You just need to find the right story.
It's all about story, isn't it, ultimately? I
believe that. I really, really believe it. It's in our DNA as humans. We love storytelling, and I think that will never go out of style.
No, I certainly hope not.
Yeah.
So as we're coming to the end of the podcast, just looking back at your life and career, I want you to ask you just a few final questions. First one is, what's your top career tip for somebody new who's coming into the business right now to give them the best chance of success?
So I have something that that I say to like a lot of young people that I talk to, whether they're students or and not to crush anyone's dreams, which is in our business, kids, adults, whatever, in entertainment, you're gonna get laid off at one point or another. It's the nature of the business. I believe that we all go through that at one point or another. I've been laid off a few times. You get new management comes in, they sweep everyone out, they bring their own people in, or there's budget cuts, which is what's happening right now, blah, blah, blah. And it can be scary as shit, man. I mean, sorry to, curse, but it can be so scary, and so you see people who are really, really afraid. And what I found, because I've done so many different things, whether it's research in and out of television, I've stepped away from kids television for a while and was doing stuff in the mindfulness space where I was acquiring for a different kind of network, because we're all, multidimensional humans and we have interests in a lot of different things. And so my advice is learn how to do a lot of different things, learn how to do a lot of different shit. Like if you have an opportunity to learn how to put together budgets for productions, do that. Learn how to do that, learn how to line produce, learn how to look at research, like really objectively, learn how to do research, learn how to write, but learn how to write even white papers, research papers, like go through some of the practices of doing that, learn how to tell a story, like really learn how to tell a great story. So whether you're pitching a show, telling your personal story, trying to learn how to tell a story, because stories are really what captivate people on either side of the desk that you're on. And so if you know how to do a lot of different shit, you'll never be afraid. You won't be afraid. And so you'll also be master of your own destiny, which when you're first coming out of school or first getting into the business, people get kind of, and it's just kind of like, don't be afraid. But definitely learn how, be curious, learn how to do a lot of different shit.
Brilliant. And what advice would you have given, looking back now, where you are now, and looking back at Terry when she started in the business, what advice would you have given your younger self if you could?
Wow. Gosh, I don't know. Maybe go through the lesson of going through doors. Maybe learn that a little earlier, and it wasn't just about it wasn't about being afraid. It was more of, oh, but I don't want to do that. I want to do this, and I know lots of people have stories about, success and like being singularly focused and not letting distractions happen. That never worked for me. I mean, I feel like there were times that I stayed in a place too long. I didn't see not that I didn't see the signs, but I got a bit too comfortable. I liked the comfort. I liked where I was. I liked doing the thing that I was doing. I stayed in a place too long. I got too comfortable when the doors opened earlier and I should have walked through them and I didn't. So I would say that is like, and it was about being too comfortable. It wasn't about complacency though. You know what I mean? Because I quite liked what I was doing, but it was kind of like but I think there's probably opportunities that I missed out on because I was liking this thing a bit too much. But I know I wasn't learning more things.
No, I get it. I understand.
Makes sense,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, completely. Totally. And my last question, because you've been living in Paris for a little while, how is your French?
Terrible. Très mal. Très mal. It has now become a vocation, not that will be for my whole life. And what's funny is that, so I take lessons twice a week, and when I'm not traveling, and there's rules, but there's like millions of exceptions to every single rule. And so I'll say to my teacher, I'm like, so what about this when you do it the opposite way? And she's like, mais oui, yes, but yes. I'm like, okay. And I have stopped asking why. But why is it like that? Why don't you say the ends of words? Why do you say the ends of this word, but not this word? And they're like, stopped asking why, just trying to memorize stuff, trying to absorb stuff, and trying to practice more. And the French are great because, and I love them. I've loved them ever since I've been working with them for 20 years now. They've been very good to me. And so, but everyone will say, yeah, Francis, it's very hard. It's very, very hard. And so everyone helps me by giving me tips and some people, I think maybe it would frustrate. It doesn't frustrate me. They, from the taxi driver to the store person to my coworkers, they correct me if I say something wrong, but I don't care because, they're like, it's very difficult. It's, they appreciate that I'm trying, and then they give me tips along the way. I mean, what else can I ask for, really?
Terry, thank you so much. You've given up a lot of time, and I know you're crazy busy, so I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Julian. It's been so great talking to you, as always. Such a pleasure. And I will see you the next time around.
Sure will. Take care.
Bye.
We're extremely grateful to Terry for taking the time to join us on the podcast this week, and I hope you all enjoyed the chat. And remember, any day you can make a kid laugh is a pretty good day. Learn how to do a lot of different shit, and don't slap each other. The show wouldn't happen at all without the wonderful work of Janet Balmforth at Liberie Consulting for her incredible organisational skills, to Julian Scott at Film London for his charm, wit and talent as our host. Find out more about Film London at filmlondon.org.uk. And the edit skills of Odelia Sickinger, who is also an awesome kids development and production executive. Find her on LinkedIn. Thank you all, and see you in the funny pages.